Margaret's hand cracked across Claire's face so hard she slammed into the basement wall, her knees hitting the concrete before she even registered the pain. "You are nothing," Margaret snarled, grabbing a fistful of Claire's hair and wrenching her head back. "Your father left you nothing. You own nothing. You are nothing." She pressed her face inches from Claire's. "But tomorrow you're going to be useful for the first and last time in your pathetic life." And she threw Claire to the floor like discarded trash. "You're marrying Damien Cross, in your stepsister's dress, in her place. And you will smile doing it." Claire tasted blood. She didn't know yet that man had never wanted Sabrina at all. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop the name of your city in the comments below because I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. It started the way all unbearable things start, quietly in the dark, while everyone else was asleep. Claire Holloway was 24 years old, and she lived in the basement of what used to be her father's house. Not a finished basement, not a cozy converted room, a basement. Concrete floor, a single window near the ceiling that let in just enough gray morning light to remind her what the world looked like before it was taken from her. She had one blanket, one pillow, and a hot plate that only worked if she held the cord at a certain angle. She had been living like this for 3 years, ever since her father, Robert Holloway, had been lowered into the ground while Margaret stood at the graveside in a black dress that cost more than Claire's entire wardrobe, dabbing at eyes that were completely dry. Claire had watched her do it. She had watched Margaret perform grief the way some people perform a song technically correct, emotionally hollow. And she had said nothing, because at the time she had still believed that underneath the coldness, underneath the control, there was something human in that woman, some thread of decency that would eventually pull itself taut. She had been wrong. 3 years of wrong. 3 years of cooking meals she wasn't allowed to eat until the family was finished. 3 years of cleaning rooms she wasn't allowed to enter except to clean them. 3 years of Sabrina Margaret's daughter, her stepsister by law, her tormentor by nature, dropping clothes on the floor and saying, "Pick those up," without ever looking at her, without ever once using her name. Claire had a system for surviving it. She woke at 5 in the morning before anyone else stirred. She made coffee for the house. She did the laundry, sorted the mail, prepped the meals, and stayed invisible. Invisible was safe. Invisible meant no one had a reason to come at her. She had learned that the hard way. But the morning that changed everything, the silence in the house was different. She noticed it the moment she reached the top of the basement stairs, a stillness that was too complete, too deliberate, the kind of quiet that a house makes when something has already happened, not when nothing has. She set the coffee brewing and stood in the kitchen for a moment, just listening. No footsteps from Sabrina's room above, no television running in Margaret's suite, no sound at all. She told herself it was nothing. She was wrong about that too. "Claire?" Margaret's voice came like a crack of thunder from the top of the staircase, not calling her, summoning her. There was a difference, and Claire had long since learned to read it. Calling was louder, sometimes impatient. Summoning was low-clipped, controlled, and it always meant something had gone wrong in a way that was about to become Claire's problem. She dried her hands on the dish towel and went. Margaret was standing in the hallway outside Sabrina's bedroom. She was already fully dressed, heels-pressed blouse, every strand of silver-streaked hair in place, and her face was doing something Claire had never seen it do before. It was tight with a feeling that wasn't anger, though anger was in there too. It was something closer to panic, which on Margaret's face looked almost identical to fury. Her jaw was set, her eyes were moving too fast, and she was holding her phone like she was going to break it in half. "Go in there," Margaret said, pointing at Sabrina's door. Claire pushed it open. The room was empty. Not just empty of Sabrina, empty of Sabrina's things. Her closet stood open, and half the clothes were gone. The vanity table, which was usually buried under makeup, perfume bottles, and jewels, had been wiped clean. The overnight bag that lived on the top shelf was missing. And on the center of the perfectly made bed, as if placed with deliberate precision, was a single envelope. Claire turned around. "She's gone." "Obviously she's gone," Margaret snapped. She walked past Claire into the room, snatched the envelope up, and tore it open. She read it once, Then her face did something that Claire had genuinely never seen in 3 years. It crumpled. Just for a second. 1 second of real terror, raw and animal, before she locked it back behind the mask. She folded the letter, slipped it into her pocket, and looked at Claire with eyes that were suddenly calculating. "Sit down," she said. "I'd rather stand." "Sit down, Claire." It was the use of her name that did it. Margaret almost never used her name. Claire sat on the edge of Sabrina's bed, and she waited. What followed was the kind of conversation that rearranges a person's entire understanding of their life. Margaret sat across from her in the vanity chair and spoke in a voice that was almost calm. She explained that the family was in debt. Not a little debt. Not the kind of debt you sort out by cutting back on vacations or selling a second car. The kind of debt that had a face and a phone number and men who showed up at the door. The fortune that Robert Holloway had left behind had been managed badly. Margaret's word was mismanaged, but Claire heard the truth beneath it, and over the course of 3 years, most of it had disappeared into investments that failed, accounts that overdrafted, and a lifestyle that had continued as though the money were still there. "How much?" Claire asked. Margaret told her. Claire stared at her. The number was so large it didn't feel real. It felt like a figure from a news story about someone else's catastrophe. "And Sabrina knew," Claire said slowly. "She knew about the debt." Margaret's silence was its own answer, and she ran. Claire stood up from the bed. She wasn't sure why she was standing. Her legs had just decided to do it. "She ran and left you with nothing." "She left me with you," Margaret said. The way she said it, quiet, measured with a kind of grim precision, made the hair on the back of Claire's neck rise. She looked at her stepmother, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, which was genuine, undiluted fear. "What does that mean?" Margaret folded her hands in her lap. 6 weeks ago, I made an arrangement, a financial arrangement with a man who has the resources to resolve every outstanding obligation this family has. In exchange, Sabrina was to marry him. That was the agreement, a marriage, a legal union. The wedding is tomorrow morning. "Tomorrow morning," Claire repeated. "The ceremony is at 10 o'clock. Everything is arranged. The dress is in the guest room. The venue is secured. The guests' his people are already traveling." Claire looked at her stepmother for a long moment. "Then you have a problem," she said carefully, "because Sabrina is gone." "Yes," Margaret agreed, "which is why you're going to take her place." The room tilted, or it felt like it did. Claire put her hand against the wall without meaning to, and stood very still, because if she moved, she thought something in her would break loose in a way she couldn't control. "You're insane," she said. "I'm desperate. There's a difference. I'm not marrying a stranger. I'm not marrying anyone. You can't, this is not something you can make me do." "Can't I?" Margaret's voice stayed level. That was the worst part of it. She wasn't raising her voice, wasn't threatening in any theatrical way. She was simply laying facts on a table. "You have no income, Claire. You have no savings. You have no apartment, no car, no assets. Everything you use, the food you eat, the bed you sleep in, the lights in that basement I pay for. And if I lose this house, if I lose everything, where exactly do you imagine you'll go?" Claire's mouth opened. No sound came out. "I'm not asking you to do something for me," Margaret continued. "I am telling you the reality of your situation. Either you walk into that ceremony tomorrow and save this family, or there is no family, there is no house, and there is nothing for either of us." "Who is he?" Claire's voice came out steadier than she expected. "Who is this man?" Margaret paused for just a half-second too long. "His name is Damien Cross." Claire didn't recognize the name, but the way Margaret said it carefully, as if each syllable were something that could cause injury if handled wrong, told her everything she needed to know about how afraid of him Margaret was. "Tell me who he is." "He is a very powerful man." "That's not an answer." "Claire, tell me who he is, or I walk out of this room right now and I don't come back." She surprised herself with that. She surprised Margaret, too. Her stepmother looked at her for a moment with something that might in another life have been respect. "He runs certain enterprises," Margaret said finally. "He has considerable influence. He is not a man who operates within conventional structures. He's a criminal. He is a man who gets things done. He's a mafia boss. The word landed in the room like a stone in a still pond. Margaret didn't deny it. She looked away, which was the same thing. Claire pressed harder. "And you arranged to sell your own daughter to a Mafia boss to cover your debts." "I arranged a marriage." "And your daughter had more sense than either of us," Claire said, and for a moment she almost respected Sabrina for it. Almost. She ran. She got out. Claire walked toward the door. "So will I." "He's in a wheelchair." She stopped. She didn't know why those 4 words stopped her. She turned around slowly. "What?" "Damien Cross," Margaret said. "There was an attempt on his life. Several months ago. He survived, but he was left with limited mobility. He uses a wheelchair now." She said it like it was a detail, a footnote, something that made the arrangement less terrifying and more manageable. "He has all the power and none of the physical threat. He needs a wife who will appear publicly beside him, someone who can carry the role. That's all this is, Claire. An appearance, a legal arrangement." Claire thought about that. She thought about what it meant that a man powerful enough to terrify Margaret was now confined to a wheelchair and still had enough reach to arrange a marriage as a financial settlement. "He's more dangerous in that chair than most men are on their feet," she said quietly. Margaret looked like she wanted to argue and found she couldn't. Claire stood at the door for a long moment. Her hand was on the frame. She could feel the house around her, 3 years of it, every floor she had scrubbed, every meal she had cooked, every time she had made herself small enough to pass through a room without anyone noticing her. She thought about her father, about what he would say if he could see her now. She thought about the basement, the concrete floor, the hot plate. She thought about the number Margaret had said. "If I do this," Claire said slowly, and the room went very quiet. "And I mean, if what happens to me, what exactly am I agreeing to? You become Mrs. Damien Cross." "That's not what I asked." Margaret shifted in her chair. "You would live in his household. You would be provided for financially completely. You would want for nothing. And the debt, the money he owes you, the money he agreed to give in exchange for a wife. It would be settled. And my name stays on the deed to this house, my father's name. Not yours, not until the debt is paid." Margaret went very still. That's my condition," Claire said. "If I'm doing this, if I'm saving you from the mess you made, then you give me something in writing that protects my father's property. You don't get to burn what's left of him to save yourself and give me nothing." The silence between them stretched out like a wire pulled too tight. Margaret said, "Fine." And just like that, Claire Holloway's life turned on a hinge. She spent the rest of that day in a state of suspended disbelief, moving through the motions of preparation, while some deep animal part of her brain kept sending up signals that this was wrong, this was not real. This was the kind of thing that happened to characters in stories, and not to real women in real houses on real streets. She tried on the dress, Sabrina's dress, which was half a size too big, but could be taken in overnight by the seamstress Margaret called, and stood in front of the mirror in the guest room while the woman worked around her in silence. And she looked at herself, really looked, and tried to locate somewhere in her reflection the version of herself that had made this choice. She wasn't sure she could find her. That night, alone in the basement, she sat on her thin mattress and did what she always did when the fear got too large to hold. She broke it into pieces, small enough to look at one at a time. He's in a wheelchair. That was the first piece. A man who needed protection. A man whose enemies had already tried to kill him and partly succeeded. That meant he had enemies she would be walking into. He is powerful. That was the second piece. Powerful enough that Margaret, who was afraid of no one, was afraid of him. Powerful enough that paying off a family's catastrophic debt was a transaction he could absorb. That kind of power in a world like his was never clean. It was always soaked in something. He doesn't know Sabrina ran, or did he? That was the third piece, and it was the one that kept her awake longest. Did Damien Cross know his bride had been swapped? Was Margaret planning to walk Claire to the altar and hope no one noticed? Did he have photographs of Sabrina? Expectations, a history with her that Claire knew nothing about? She fell asleep with that question still turning in her mind, and her dreams were full of corridors that never ended, and doors that opened into more doors. The morning came like a sentence being handed down. Claire was dressed by 8. The seamstress had done her work well overnight. The dress fit, at least technically, though it felt like wearing someone else's skin. Heavy white satin long sleeves, a neckline that was elegant in the way Sabrina had always been elegant, designed to impress, not to comfort. Margaret came to the basement door and looked at her for a moment with something unreadable on her face, and then said only, "The car is here." "Has anyone told him?" Claire asked. "Does he know?" "Everything is in hand," Margaret said, which was not an answer. Claire noted that. The drive took 40 minutes. They moved through the city and out the other side into a part of it Claire had never had reason to visit. Wide streets, old buildings with the kind of architecture that spoke of money accumulated over generations, not luck. The venue was a private estate gated with men stationed at intervals along the driveway who watched the car pass with expressions that revealed nothing and missed nothing. Claire watched them through the window. "His men?" she asked. "Yes." She counted 7 of them just on the approach. There would be more inside. The ceremony room was already prepared when they arrived. Dark floral arrangements, candles burning in daylight, rows of chairs, occupied by people who shared the same quality as the men outside, watchful, still dressed expensively, radiating something that was adjacent to danger. These were not wedding guests in any ordinary sense. These were people who had come to witness a transaction, to acknowledge an alliance, to see for themselves the woman their boss had chosen to bind himself to. Claire stood at the back of the room with a heavy veil lowered over her face and Margaret beside her, and she looked through the gauze of white fabric at the aisle ahead of her, at the altar, and at the figure waiting there. Damien Cross was not what she had assembled from the pieces she had been given. She had imagined someone diminished by the wheelchair, someone whose physical limitation read as weakness, as loss. She had been wrong about that, the way she had been wrong about Margaret's decency, completely, entirely without a single redeeming caveat. He sat upright in the chair with the posture of a man who had never in his life permitted himself to collapse. His suit was black, precise, impeccable. His shoulders were broad, his hands folded in his lap with a stillness that felt deliberate rather than passive. His face, even at this distance, even through the veil, was striking in the particular way that danger is often striking, symmetrical, controlled, with dark eyes that were moving through the room, with a slow, systematic attentiveness that missed absolutely nothing. His gaze moved to the back of the room. Even through the veil across the distance, even knowing he couldn't possibly see her expression, Claire felt it land on her like a physical thing. She stopped breathing for exactly 2 seconds. Margaret's hand pressed against the small of her back. "Walk." Claire walked. Every step down that aisle was its own small act of will. She kept her eyes forward and her spine straight, and she told herself that she was not afraid, or she told herself that fear was simply information, and she was choosing to receive it without letting it steer. The people in the chairs turned to watch her pass. She felt their attention like weather, not hostile exactly, but assessing the way you assess something that may or may not become a problem for you. She reached the altar. She stood before Damien Cross and looked at him through the veil, and he looked at her, and neither of them spoke. The officiant began. The words washed over her in the way that overwhelming things sometimes do not, meaningless but unable to attach themselves to anything solid inside her, because everything solid had already been repurposed for simple survival. She heard herself answer at the correct moments. She heard him answer too, in a voice that was low and even, and carried the specific gravity of a man who never wasted words. When the moment came to lift the veil, she felt his hand, his right hand steady and warm, reach up and fold the white fabric back from her face. The room went very quiet. She didn't understand why until she looked at him properly, directly, with no gauze between them, and saw that he was looking at her with an expression that was not surprise, not even a trace of it. He looked at her the way you look at something you have been waiting for long enough that the waiting has become its own kind of familiarity. "Claire," he said. Not a question, not a greeting, something more deliberate than either. And the silence in the room told her that every person in those chairs had just been waiting to hear which name he would say. She stared at him. "You knew." "Yes, you knew she was gone." "I knew before she left," he said. And then quietly, in a voice meant only for her, "I was counting on it." The officiant cleared his throat. Damien Cross looked at Claire. Holloway really looked at her with those dark, patient, entirely unsurprised eyes and said, "You can ask me everything later. Right now, just say yes." She stood at the edge of the most consequential moment of her life. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. The room was still. The candles were burning. 40 pairs of eyes were resting on her face. She thought about the basement, the concrete floor, the hot plate cord held at a certain angle so it would work. She thought about the way he had said her name, not Sabrina's, hers, with the ease of someone who had been saying it in private for a very long time. "Yes," Claire Holloway said. And just like that, she became Mrs. Damien Cross. But as the officiant pronounced the final words and the witnesses rose around them, in the particular silence of a room that understood the weight of what had just occurred, Claire kept her eyes on her husband's face, and the question that had kept her awake all night was no longer whether he had known. It was how long he had known, and what exactly he had been planning. The ring on her finger was cold. That was the first thing Claire noticed as the car pulled away from the estate. Not the weight of it, not the unfamiliar press of metal against her skin, but the temperature. Cold even though she'd been wearing it for less than an hour. Cold in the way that things are cold when they come from somewhere that has never been warm. She sat in the back of a black SUV she had not chosen beside a man she had married 40 minutes ago, and she stared at her hands folded in her lap, and she did not speak. Neither did he. The silence between them was not uncomfortable exactly. It was more like a held breath, the kind that a room holds before something important is said, and both of them seemed to understand without discussing it that whatever came next needed to be approached carefully. She broke first. She had always broken first. It was a survival habit she'd developed under Margaret's roof. Silence cost you more than speaking did, because silence meant the other person got to define the terms. "How long?" she asked. Damien Cross turned his head toward her. He had that quality of stillness that she had noticed at the altar, not passivity, but the deliberate, practiced calm of someone who had long since learned that reaction was a form of vulnerability. "How long what? How long have you known about me?" He considered that, not the way people consider things when they're buying time. He wasn't a man who needed to buy time. He considered it the way a person does when they're deciding exactly how much truth to give and in what order. 7 months, he said. She turned her head to look at him directly for the first time since they'd gotten in the car. 7 months. Yes. And Sabrina? I met Sabrina twice, he said. Both times at Margaret's arrangement. Both times with a photographer present, which I thought was interesting. Something moved across his expression, not quite contempt, not quite amusement. She spent both meetings talking about herself, which told me everything I needed to know about what kind of wife she would be. So you agreed to the arrangement anyway? I agreed to an arrangement, he said carefully. Not necessarily the one Margaret thought she was making. Claire stared at him. Her pulse had kicked up. She kept her voice even. You used her. You used Margaret's desperation to get to someone else, to get to me. He didn't deny it. He also didn't confirm it. He simply looked at her with those dark, patient eyes and waited for her to work through it, which somehow made it worse, because it meant he had already predicted this conversation and was comfortable enough with where it led to, let it run its course. Why me? She asked. Because you survived, he said simply. Most people in your position would have broken, would have left or turned bitter in a way that made them useless or collapsed into something small and permanent. You didn't. You got up every day in that basement, and you functioned, and you planned, and you stayed sharp. That is not a small thing, Claire. That is exactly the kind of person I need beside me. The car moved through streets she didn't recognize. She looked out the window and then back at him. You had me watched. I had you protected, he corrected. And the distinction in his voice was so clean, so certain, that she almost let it go. Almost. There is a difference, she said, between protection and surveillance. One of them requires my consent. For the first time since she'd met him, something shifted in his expression, something that looked just briefly like genuine surprise, as though he had been prepared for fear, for anger, for silence, but not for this. Not for her drawing a line with that much precision on the first day. You're right, he said, and then nothing else, just that. She didn't know what to do with that, so she turned back to the window and said nothing for the rest of the drive. The house, his house she supposed, now hers, was in the kind of neighborhood that didn't announce itself. No gates with gold details, no ostentatious columns. It was old and wide and set back from the street behind mature trees, and it had the specific quiet confidence of a place that had nothing to prove. A man named Victor held the front door, late 50s, solid build, a scar along his jaw that he made no effort to conceal, and he nodded at Claire with a respect that felt genuine rather than performed. "Mrs. Cross," he said. The name landed on her chest like a stone. She managed a nod. Inside, a woman named Elena, 50s. Dark hair pulled back, the kind of efficient warmth that speaks of someone who runs a household the way a general runs a campaign, showed her to a set of rooms on the second floor and told her in a tone that was kind without being soft that she could rest, that dinner would be at 7, that if she needed anything, she only had to ask. "Where is he?" Claire asked. "Mr. Cross is in his study," Elena said. "He generally works through the afternoon." "Does he come to dinner?" "Every night," Elena said, and then something passing briefly across her face. "He is not what people say he is. I have worked for this family for 19 years. I want you to know that." Claire looked at her for a moment. "What do people say he is?" Elena met her eyes steadily. "A monster," she said. "They are wrong." She left Claire standing in the middle of a room that was bigger than the entire basement she had lived in for 3 years, and Claire sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed through the reality of where she was, who she was now, and what came next. She did not rest. She wasn't built for it. Not really, stillness had always made the fear louder. Instead, she moved through the room methodically, the way she'd moved through the house on Keaton Street every morning at 5 o'clock, taking inventory cataloging exits, understanding the space she was in. Old habit, good habit. At 6:15, she washed her face, changed out of the dress, folding it carefully because old habits don't die just because your life has turned over, and put on the only other clothes she had, brought a plain dark blouse and gray slacks that were clean and pressed, but nothing like the rooms around them. She found the dining room herself, which she suspected was a small test she had not been told she was taking. Damien was already there. He had changed too, a simpler shirt, the jacket gone, the formality of the ceremony stripped back to something more baseline. He was at the head of the table, and he had a folder open in front of him that he closed when she walked in, not hurriedly but deliberately, the way you close something when you decide you're done with it, rather than because you're hiding it. "You found it," he said. "I find most things," she said, and sat down. Elena served. The food was real food, not elaborate, not performative, just good roasted chicken vegetables, bread, still warm from the oven. Claire realized she was hungry. She hadn't eaten since the day before. She ate without apology, and across the table Damien watched her with an expression she couldn't categorize yet. "You're not what I expected either," he said. She looked up. "What did you expect?" "Someone more afraid." "I am afraid," she said. "I'm just not going to perform it for you." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good." She set her fork down. "I need ground rules." His expression didn't change. "All right. I am not a decoration. I am not a prop for whatever you need the world to see. If I am going to be in this house, in this life, I need to know what is actually being asked of me, and I need to have the ability to say no to things. Real no. Not the kind that gets managed or redirected." "What else?" "I want access to this house, to information about what I'm walking into. Not every detail I understand. There are things you won't share, and I'm not asking for access to your operations. But if there is danger, I need to know the shape of it. I spent 3 years being kept ignorant in a house that was falling apart around me. I will not do that again." Damien looked at her for a long moment. The candles on the table burned steadily between them. "And in exchange," he asked, "in exchange, I will be exactly what you need in public. I will be present, composed, and convincing. I will not embarrass you. I will not undermine you, and I will not run." She paused. "Unlike Sabrina." Something moved across his face. "That last part," he said slowly, "I already knew." "How?" she asked. How did you know I wouldn't run? Because you had 100 opportunities to run from Margaret, he said, and you never took them. Not because you couldn't, because you were waiting for something worth running toward. The silence after that stretched out long enough that Claire had to look away. She picked up her fork again, mostly to have something to do with her hands. The men who tried to kill you, she said, keeping her voice neutral. Are they still a threat? Yes. Do they know about me? About the marriage? By tomorrow morning they will, which means I'm a target, which means you're protected, he said. There is a difference. She recognized the echo of their earlier exchange. She didn't know yet whether it was intentional. She suspected it was. Victor, she said, is he the one responsible for my safety? Victor and 3 others you'll meet tomorrow. You won't always see them, but they'll always be there. She absorbed that. The wheelchair, she said then, because she had been circling it and she was done circling things. The attempt on your life, how long ago? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 8 months. And the doctor's is there. The prognosis is uncertain, he said. Flat, final. The tone of someone who has said those words enough times that they have worn smooth. I don't discuss it. Okay, she said simply, and did not push. She watched the tension in his shoulders ease by a fraction, just a fraction, and she filed that away. He had expected her to push. She had chosen not to. It wasn't strategy. It was the truth. She understood what it felt like to have people treat your damage as something they were owed an explanation for. After dinner, he asked if she wanted to see the study. She said yes. The room was lined with books, but not decoratively. These were books that had been read, their spines cracked, and variable bookmarks at irregular intervals. There was a large desk and a secondary table covered in maps and documents and the specific organized chaos of a mind that worked constantly. There was also on the far wall something that stopped her walking. A corkboard, large, covered in photographs, documents, printed pages, connected by lines in different colors. And at the center of it, among all the other material, were photographs of her. Not invasive photographs, not hidden camera shots taken through windows. These were photographs of her life, as it was observable from outside Claire at the grocery store, carrying bags she'd been sent for. Claire on the porch of the Keaton Street house in the early morning before anyone was up. Claire at her father's grave on the anniversary of his death, sitting alone with one hand on the stone. Claire walking in the rain without an umbrella because she'd been sent out without one and hadn't been told there'd be rain. She stood in front of those photographs for a long time without speaking. I told you, Damien said quietly from behind her. I had you watched. You told me you had me protected, she said. Her voice was very careful. Yes. These, she pointed at the grave photograph. That day was someone there. Not close enough for you to see. She turned around. She looked at him, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, not violation, though both were in there. She felt something closer to grief, because what she was looking at was evidence that someone had been paying attention to her during the 3 years when no one in the world had thought to. And that was somehow the most disorienting thing that had happened to her in a day full of disorienting things. Why the grave, she asked. Because you went alone, he said. Every year, not even on the right day sometimes, because Margaret kept finding things for you to do. But you went, every time. He paused. That tells you something about a person. She turned back to the board. She looked at herself, at 3 years of herself, documented by a stranger who had apparently decided she was worth watching. You could have just talked to me, she said. You were not in a position where you could have said yes freely, he said. I needed the conditions to be right. She looked at him over her shoulder. You needed Sabrina to run. I needed you to have no other choice, he said. And then with an honesty that she hadn't expected and didn't know what to do with, I'm not proud of that part. She held his gaze. But you did it anyway. Yes. She turned back to the board. She looked at the photograph of herself in the rain, carrying groceries, head down, no umbrella. She looked at it for a long time. I want that one, she said. He didn't ask why. It's yours, he said. She unpinned it herself. She held it in both hands and looked at the woman in the rain, who didn't know anyone was watching, who was just moving through her life one errand at a time, holding herself together through sheer stubbornness and habit. She looked at her, and she thought, you made it. Somehow through all of it, you made it to the other side of something. She just wasn't sure yet what the other side looked like. She found out at 11:15 that night. She had been in her room for 2 hours, sitting at the window with the lights off when she heard it. Voices not raised exactly, but taut with the specific frequency of men communicating urgency. She went to the door, opened it a crack, and listened. Victor's voice, low and fast. It's confirmed. Rossi knows about the marriage. He moved faster than we expected. His people are watching the east perimeter now, 2 vehicles. A pause. Then Damien, how many? At least 6 that we've confirmed, probably more. Another pause, shorter. Pull Marcus and Hale inside. I don't want anyone outside until morning. And Victor? His voice dropped lower, and she had to strain. She doesn't know yet. Keep it that way tonight. She's had enough. She eased the door shut. She stood in the dark of her room and processed what she had just heard. Rossi. A name she didn't know, belonging to a threat she hadn't been given the shape of. Men watching the perimeter right now outside this house in the dark. 6 confirmed. Probably more. She had asked for honesty. She had asked to know the shape of the danger. He had agreed, and then within 6 hours had told his man to keep her in the dark because she'd had enough for one day, which meant he was already making decisions about what she could handle, which meant whatever he said about wanting a partner, some part of him still thought of her as something that needed to be managed. She got back in bed. She did not sleep. She lay there in the dark with her eyes open, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her footsteps, moving deliberately, a door closing, voices too low to parse. And she thought about the photograph of herself in the rain, about the woman who kept going even when nobody was watching. She was still that woman. That hadn't changed. The address had changed, the name had changed, the scale of the danger had changed completely. But the woman herself was the same. And tomorrow morning, she decided she was going to find Damien Cross before breakfast and tell him clearly that the agreement they had made at that dinner table was not optional. She would not be managed. She would not be kept comfortable while things happened around her. She had not married him to become a different kind of prisoner. She had married him to become something she had never been allowed to be in that house on Keaton Street, in that basement, in 3 years of cooking and cleaning and making herself invisible. She had married him to matter, and she intended to hold him to that no matter how many men named Rossi parked themselves in the dark outside the walls. She closed her eyes. Sleep came eventually, reluctant and thin. And somewhere in the house she knew Damien Cross was still awake, working, planning already several moves ahead in a game she hadn't been given the rules to yet. She intended to learn them faster than he expected. She was up before 5. Old habit. Some things don't unlearn themselves just because the address changes. She found the kitchen without help, put coffee on, and stood at the counter in the early dark, with her hands wrapped around a mug and her mind already moving through everything she'd overheard the night before. Rossi. 6 vehicles, east perimeter. The name sat in her chest like a splinter, small enough to ignore, sharp enough to make itself known with every breath. She heard the wheels before she heard him. Damien came through the kitchen doorway at 5:47, and he stopped when he saw her. Just a fraction of a second, barely anything, but she caught it. He hadn't expected her to be up. She had noted that the study light had been on until past 2 in the morning, visible under the door when she'd walked past at one point during the night. He looked like a man who had worked through the dark and hadn't rested enough, which made him look unexpectedly like a person. Not the controlled, deliberate figure from the ceremony, a person who got tired and pushed through it anyway. "You're up early," he said. "I'm always up early." She poured a second mug and held it out. He took it without comment, which she filed as a good sign. "Rossi," she said. No preamble, no softening. He went very still. "I heard Victor last night," she said. "Not the details, just enough. 6 vehicles on the east perimeter confirmed, probably more." She set her own mug down and looked at him directly. "You told him not to tell me." He didn't deny it. "You'd had a difficult day." "I have had 3 years of difficult days," she said. I did not ask you to protect me from information. That was not the agreement. The muscle in his jaw tightened. She watched it. He was not a man accustomed to being held accountable by anyone inside these walls. She could feel that the slight resistance of it, the way a door feels when the frame has warped. But he didn't deflect. He set the mug on the counter, and he looked at her with those patient dark eyes, and he said, "You're right. I handled that wrong." "Who is Rossi?" He was quiet for 3 full seconds. She counted them. Then, Marco Rossi. He ran operations in the Northeast supply chains, distribution money, through 3 layers of legitimate business. He and I had an arrangement for 6 years. 18 months ago, that arrangement ended. Because I found out he had been skimming from the arrangement for 4 of those 6 years and decided to call it even rather than escalate. His voice was flat, factual. He interpreted that as weakness. The attempt on my life 8 months ago was his interpretation of weakness. Claire absorbed that. He thinks the wheelchair makes you easier to finish. He thought it, Damien said. He's revising that opinion. And the marriage, why does he care about that? Because a man with a wife is a man with a vulnerability. He'll use you if he cannot physically, not directly. He's not that crude, but pressure, appearances. He'll find ways to make your life uncomfortable if he thinks it unsettles me. He paused. I should have told you last night. Yes, she said. You should have. She picked up her mug again. What does he know about me, about who I actually am? By now, probably that you were a replacement, that the original bride ran. A pause. Which he'll find amusing. He'll think it means I'm already working from a weak position. Let him think that, she said. Damien looked at her. What? Let him think I'm a liability. Let him think this is already fractured. She held his gaze steadily. If he's looking for weakness, give him a convincing enough version of it that he looks in the wrong direction while you do whatever you're actually planning. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. This one had weight in it. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at very few people, with something close to genuine evaluation. Not the performative kind, the real kind. Where did that come from? He asked. 3 years of living with someone who underestimated me, she said simply. I learned to use it. Something shifted in his expression, not softness exactly, but an opening the way a room opens when you take down a wall that was never structural. He nodded once slowly. All right, he said. Then we do this together. But Claire. He waited until she looked at him. If I tell you something is not safe, I need you to listen. Not blindly. Ask me why. Push back if you think I'm wrong. But listen. Same goes, she said. He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way to his face, but it was close. Fair enough, he said. Elena arrived at 6:30, took one look at the two of them standing in the kitchen with coffee and the particular charged quiet of people who have just negotiated something important and said nothing except that breakfast would be ready in 20 minutes. Victor appeared at 7 with a report Claire was now apparently supposed to hear, and she sat at the kitchen table and listened to him relay the overnight surveillance detail with the same composure she had used to sit through Margaret's financial catastrophes, present-focused processing. The 6 vehicles had reduced to 4 by dawn. Rossi's people weren't escalating yet. They were watching. Victor's read was that they were waiting for a signal, waiting to see how Damien behaved in the first week of the marriage, whether he seemed distracted, whether his routines changed. Then his routines don't change, Claire said. Both men looked at her. If Rossi is watching for distraction, for disruption, then the most useful thing we can do is look completely undisturbed. He expects chaos, a replacement bride, a rushed wedding, a man who's vulnerable. Give him the opposite. She looked at Victor. What does Damien's normal week look like publicly? Victor glanced at Damien, who gave the faintest nod. Victor said, Tuesday, he has a standing lunch at Corelli's with 2 business associates. Thursday, there's a board meeting for one of the legitimate holdings real estate development company downtown. Friday evenings are generally social. He has standing invitations to 3 different events each week and usually attends one. Then we do all 3, Claire said. This week, publicly together, completely calm. She turned to Damien. Unless you have a reason not to. No, he said. And then, you understand what those appearances will look like. People will be watching you. People have been watching me my whole life, she said. They just never noticed what they were looking at. Victor excused himself after that, and Claire noticed just before he left the room that the hard line of his expression had shifted almost imperceptibly. Not into warmth, into something more specific than that. Respect. She took that too quietly and stored it. By mid-morning, she had met the other 3 members of what Damien called her personal detail, though he used the word team, which she appreciated. Marcus was young, late 20s, watchful in the specific way of someone who had trained himself out of showing emotion, because emotion cost you half a second. Haley was older 50s with the build of a man who had spent decades being useful, and the economy of movement that came with it. The third was a woman which surprised Claire slightly, and pleased her more than she let show her name, was Reyes 30s, ex-military from her posture, and she looked at Claire with the frank, assessing gaze of someone who was deciding whether this new variable was going to be a problem or an asset. "I'm not going to be a problem," Claire told her directly before Reyes had said a word. Reyes raised an eyebrow. "Good," she said. "Neither am I." They were going to get along fine. Damien worked through the morning in the study, and Claire, because she was not a person who could exist without purpose, asked Elena what needed doing in the house and was shown a list of things that had apparently been deferred during the months of the household running on a reduced staff. Nothing grand. Practical things. A storage room that needed reorganizing correspondence, that needed sorting and responding to a household account that needed reviewing, because a vendor had been overbilling for 4 months and nobody had caught it. She caught it in 40 minutes. She brought the file to the study door, knocked, and entered when he called. She set the folder on the desk in front of him, opened to the relevant page, and said, "Your household account has been overbilled by a catering company 11 times in the past 4 months. Total discrepancy is about $4,000. I've drafted a letter to their billing department. I just need you to authorize the account number so I can attach it to the dispute form." He looked at the folder. He looked at her. He said, "Elena has been managing the household accounts for... Elena is managing a great deal." Claire said not unkindly. $4,000 is not her fault. It's a billing error, probably automated. But it's $4,000 and you're not getting it back unless someone makes the call. She tapped the folder. "Account number," he told her. She wrote it down and left. She heard him, just as she reached the door, say quietly, and to no one, 7 months... and I still didn't see that coming. She allowed herself one small private smile in the hallway. Then she went to finish the letter. Lunch on Tuesday at Corelli's was the first real test. The restaurant was the kind that didn't have prices on the menu and required a reservation 6 weeks out for anyone who wasn't already known by name. Damien's table was in a corner position with clear sight lines to the door. Not an accident, she understood now, in the way she was starting to understand, that very little about his life was accidental. The 2 business associates were a man named Gareth, silver-haired and careful, who ran the legitimate face of 2 of Damien's investment portfolios, and a younger man named Philip, who handled communications, and whose eyes went to Claire, and then carefully away twice in the first 5 minutes. "My wife," Damien said simply when he introduced her. Not, "This is Claire," or "You may have heard." Just my wife, with the weight of a statement rather than an explanation. Claire extended her hand to Gareth, who shook it and said something gracious. She turned to Philip, who shook it too, and she held his gaze for just a moment longer than socially necessary, long enough to make clear that she had noticed his double take and was unbothered by it. He cleared his throat. "It's a pleasure," he said. "I'm sure," she said pleasantly. Damien's mouth did the thing it sometimes did, not quite a smile, but adjacent. She was starting to recognize it. The lunch was business mostly, with the specific texture of business conducted in layered language, where 3 things were being discussed on the surface and 2 more underneath. Claire listened without appearing to listen, another old skill developed over 3 years of sitting in rooms where she was meant to be invisible. And by the end of the meal, she had a reasonable map of at least one of the things beneath the surface, which was that Gareth was concerned about a property deal that had a third party. Claire didn't know yet, but whose initials appeared to be M.R. Marco Rossi. She filed it and said nothing until they were in the car. "The Hendricks property," she said. "Rossi has a stake in it." Damien turned his head. "How?" Gareth mentioned the third-party investor twice, and both times his sentence went short, and he looked at you, not Philip, both times. He's worried you don't know, or that knowing will change your decision, which means it's either a problem you haven't addressed yet, or a problem he's hoping you'll walk away from. She kept her voice level. Which is it? A pause. The second one, Damien said. Are you going to walk away? No. Then you need to tell Gareth that clearly before he makes a decision based on an assumption. She turned to look at him. He's loyal to you, but loyal people make bad choices when they don't have information. They're trying to protect you from something you've already decided to face. Damien was quiet for long enough that she thought she had overstepped. Then he took out his phone and sent a message she assumed to Gareth and slid it back into his pocket. I've been doing this for 15 years, he said without heat, just observation. I know, she said, and you're very good at it. But 15 years of being the smartest person in the room means the people around you have stopped telling you things because they assume you already know. She looked out the window. You don't always know. Nobody does. He sat with that for the rest of the drive. That evening at 6 o'clock, Margaret called. Claire stared at her phone screen for 3 full rings before she answered. She had been expecting it. Margaret was predictable in her patterns, and the pattern here was clear. Wait a day, let Claire settle, then make contact while she still felt uncertain and off balance. Claire. Margaret's voice was precisely calibrated, not warm, not hostile, the specific temperature of someone who needs something and is managing the approach. Margaret. I just wanted to make sure you were... What do you need? Claire said. A pause. The mask slipped slightly. She could hear it in the half-second before Margaret recomposed. I only wanted to check in. You married yesterday. It's a significant... You have never called to check on me in 3 years, Claire said. Don't start now. What do you need? The silence was longer this time, then with the thin edge of real feeling beneath the performance. The account. The one tied to your father's holdings. There have been some complications. Define complications. The creditors have been notified of the marriage. Some of them are now contacting the estate directly, which they are not supposed to do, and there are letters that need, I'll handle it, Claire said. How you don't have access to... I have access to everything I need, Claire said. Forward the letters to this number. I'll have someone look at them. She paused for one beat. And Margaret. The condition we agreed to about my father's name on the deed. I need that in writing by Friday. Not a conversation, a document, with a notary. Dead silence. Friday, Claire repeated. Otherwise, I start asking Damien's legal team to look at the original debt arrangement, and I have a feeling that conversation is going to be more complicated for you than it is for me. She kept her voice very calm. Forward the letters. Have the document ready Friday. That's all. She ended the call. Her hand was not entirely steady. She pressed it flat against her thigh and breathed through it, not because the conversation had frightened her, but because 3 years of compressed anger had nowhere immediate to go, and the body didn't always know the difference between victory and danger. She heard footsteps, wheels. She corrected herself. The particular sound she was already learning. Stop outside the room she was in. That was Margaret, Damien said. Yes. You handled it. Yes. She looked up at him. I told her to send the creditor letters here. I hope that's all right. It's your home, he said, and the simplicity of it, not a gesture, not a grand declaration, just that flat, matter-of-fact statement, hit her somewhere she wasn't prepared for it. She looked away back at her phone and cleared her throat. Rossi is connected to one of your properties, she said. We talked about it in the car. But I want to know the full picture, all the places where your world and his still overlap. Because if we're going to do this correctly, if we're going to stand in front of his people at Corelli's and everywhere else and look completely solid, I need to know where the ground is soft. All of it. Damien came fully into the room. He stopped across from her. He looked at her for a moment. That long, measured look she was beginning to understand as his version of deciding to trust. And then he said, That's going to take a while. I know, she said. I'm not going anywhere. He moved to the chair across from her, and he began to talk. Really talk, not the managed, careful versions of information she'd been receiving in small portions, but the actual architecture of it, the real map of where his world connected with Rossi's and where the pressure points were, and what the last 8 months had looked like from inside a wheelchair while your enemy decided you were finished. He talked for almost 2 hours, and she listened to every word without interrupting, except to ask questions that were specific and precise, and twice caught details he had skipped over without realizing. By the time Elena knocked to say dinner was ready, Claire had a picture in her mind that was complicated and dangerous and completely clear. She also had something she hadn't entirely expected. She had the growing uncomfortable significant sense that Damien Cross was not pretending when he talked to her, that the version of himself he brought into these conversations was not a performance, not a strategy, not the same face he turned to the Gareths and the Phillips and the Victors of his world. It was something more unguarded than that, something that trusted her with the weight of itself, and she was not sure what to do with that yet. It was a different kind of dangerous than the one she had been preparing for. They went to dinner. Elena had made something simple and good. They sat across from each other in the same candlelit room as the night before, and the silence between them now had a completely different quality. Not the held breath of strangers, not the loaded pause of people negotiating, but the quiet of two people who have covered a lot of ground and are resting in it for a moment. "Tomorrow," Damien said eventually, "I have a meeting I normally take alone." She looked at him. "I'd like you there," he said. "Who is it with?" "A man named Carver. He runs the East Side independently. He's not affiliated with Rossi, but Rossi has been courting him for 3 months." He paused. "Having you there changes the read he gets. It tells him the marriage is real and stable, which makes me a better option than whatever Rossi is offering." "What do you need me to do?" "Exactly what you did today at Corelli's," he said. "Be present. Be calm. Let them look." She considered that. "And if Carver asks me something directly?" "He will," Damien said. "He's testing me through you. That's how he works." "Then I'll need to know what positions you hold on the things he's likely to ask about." "I'll have Victor brief you tonight." "Damien." She said his name deliberately. It was the first time she had used it directly, and they both registered that. "Brief me yourself. Victor gives me information. You give me context. There's a difference." The candle between them burned steadily. He held her gaze and she held his, and the thing between them, whatever it was becoming, neither of them had a name for it yet, pulled slightly tighter without either of them moving an inch. "All right," he said. "After dinner." She nodded and reached for her water glass. Her hand was completely steady. Outside the walls, somewhere in the dark of the east perimeter, men whose names she was still learning watched the windows of the house where she now lived, and she was aware of them, and she was not afraid. Not because the danger wasn't real, it was completely real, and getting realer. But because for the first time in 3 years the danger had a face and a name and a shape she could see clearly. And Claire Holloway. Claire Cross. She reminded herself the name still new against her tongue had always been better at surviving what she could see than what was hidden. Tomorrow was the Carver meeting. Tomorrow she would find out how far she'd actually come. Victor briefed her at 9. Damien sat across from her and added what Victor left out, which was considerable. By 10:30, she had a working picture of Thomas Carver, 61 years old, self-made, ran the East Side through a network of legitimate construction and contracting businesses that were clean on paper and considerably less clean beneath. He had 3 rules he was known for. He never made a decision. In the first meeting, he always brought his son, and he watched the women in the room more carefully than the men, because he believed correctly she thought that women were less likely to be performing and more likely to show the real temperature of a situation. "He's going to watch me," she said. "Every second," Damien confirmed. "And if he thinks I'm uncomfortable or managed or performing, he walks," Damien said, "and goes to Rossi." She absorbed that. What does Rossi have to offer him? Territory. East Side expansion rights he's been blocked from for 2 years. Damien's voice was controlled, but she was beginning to read the texture beneath it. There was something tight in it. If Carver aligns with Rossi, it splits the Northeast clean down the middle. We lose leverage on 3 operations, and Rossi gains a ground presence he doesn't currently have. "So this meeting is not just about Carver," she said. "No," he said. It's about Rossi. Carver is the move Rossi is trying to make. If we neutralize it here, Rossi's options narrow significantly. She looked at Damien for a moment. And if we don't? He held her gaze. Then the pressure on us doubles before the month is out. She nodded slowly. What time? 11 o'clock, he said, at Carver's offices downtown. She stood up. Then I need to sleep, she said. And tomorrow morning I need 45 minutes before we leave. Not for preparation, I'm already prepared. Just 45 minutes to be still before we walk in there. He looked at her with something she was beginning to recognize as the specific form of respect that surprised him. Take whatever you need, he said. She went upstairs. She slept better than she expected. The morning came fast. She was up at 5 as always, coffee made sitting in the kitchen, in the particular quiet that the house had before it woke around her. She thought about Margaret, about the document that was due Friday, about the creditor letters that had arrived in a forwarded bundle yesterday afternoon, and which she had sorted and organized and flagged by urgency with the same methodical precision she had once applied to sorting Sabrina's laundry. She thought about her father and what he had actually left her, not the money which was gone, but the stubbornness, the absolute refusal to go quietly. She thought about walking into Carver's office in 2 hours and being looked at. Being looked at had never bothered her. What bothered her was being looked through, which was different. Margaret had looked through her for 3 years, so had Sabrina. So had every person who came to that house and saw the girl who poured the coffee and assumed that the coffee was all she was. Thomas Carver was not going to look through her. She would make sure of that. Damien appeared at 6:15 earlier than she expected. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw her already there, and for a moment they existed in that specific morning quiet together, no agenda yet, no performance, just two people who had made an unlikely agreement and were figuring out day by day what it actually looked like. "You're already ready," he said. "I told you I only needed the 45 minutes for stillness, not for preparation." She poured his coffee and set it in front of him. "How do you want to play the entrance?" He sat, wrapped both hands around the mug. "We arrive together. We enter together. I introduce you as my wife. Nothing else needs to be said. And if his son tries to separate us, redirect you to a separate conversation." Damien looked at her. "That's not something I'd considered." "It's something Rossi would have told him to try," she said. "If Carver's son can pull you into a separate room even for 5 minutes, even for something that sounds purely logistical, it puts me alone in the room with Carver without context, without you. And then whatever Carver reads from me, he reads without the frame of you beside me." She met his eyes. "Don't let the sun separate us. Doesn't matter how reasonable the reason sounds." Damien was quiet for a moment. Then, "Victor told me you were sharp. I didn't understand the full scale of it until approximately 36 hours into knowing you." She almost smiled. "Victor is perceptive." "Victor is rarely wrong about people," he said. "In 15 years, I can count the times on one hand." She looked at him over her coffee. "What did he say about me specifically?" "That you were going to be either the best thing that ever happened to this operation or the most significant problem I'd ever had to manage." He paused. "He said he was betting on the first one." "Good," she said. "He'd win." They left at 10:15. Reyes drove Marcus in the passenger seat, Hale following in a second vehicle 2 cars back. Claire sat beside Damien in the back, and they did not review the plan or rehearse anything. They were both quiet in the specific way of people who are ready and know it. The offices were on the 14th floor of a building that was legitimately successful construction and contracting, real business, real revenue, real employees who had no idea what the 14th floor was actually used for. The lobby was standard issue. The elevator was fast. The receptionist on 14 had the practiced neutrality of someone who had worked in proximity to dangerous people long enough that nothing surprised her anymore. Thomas Carver met them in the hallway outside the conference room. He was exactly as described, thick-built 60s with the compact energy of a man who had never stopped working with his hands, even after he'd stopped needing to. He looked at Damien first, then he looked at Claire. She felt the assessment land thorough, rapid, experienced, and she held it without flinching, without performing, without manufacturing warmth she didn't feel. She simply looked back at him with the same steadiness she'd used in Margaret's kitchen 1,000 times. The steadiness of someone who has nothing to prove because proving things stopped being the point a long time ago. "Mr. Cross," Carver said. His voice was like gravel run through a press. He extended his hand. Damien shook it. "Thomas, this is my wife, Claire." Carver turned to her, took her hand. His grip was firm without being aggressive, a man measuring, not intimidating. "Mrs. Cross," he said. "Mr. Carver," she said. "Thank you for making the time." His eyes moved over her face one more time. Then he stepped back and gestured toward the conference room. "Come in." The son, Daniel Carver, late 30s, with his father's build and considerably less of his father's patience, was already inside. He stood when they entered, shook hands, and then within 60 seconds, exactly as Claire had predicted, he said to Damien, "I actually had a few preliminary questions for you about the Hendricks property, if you don't mind. There's a smaller room just down the hall where I have the documents laid out." "That's fine," Damien said without missing a beat. "Claire can walk through those details. She's been reviewing the Hendricks account directly." He looked at his wife. "You have the numbers?" She held Daniel Carver's gaze with complete calm. "Every one of them," she said. Daniel Carver blinked. Once, then sat back down. Thomas Carver at the head of the table made the smallest sound, almost nothing, barely audible, and she caught it and recognized it approval. The kind you make involuntarily when something confirms what you suspected. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Carver asked her 4 direct questions. The first was about the Hendricks property, which she answered with the same precision she had applied to finding the $4,000 billing discrepancy 2 days ago. The second was about the Northeast operation structure, which she answered carefully and accurately with the briefing she had absorbed last night. The third was personal, not strategic personal, which she had not expected. "You married quickly," Carver said, watching her. "Yes," she said. "Some people in my position would find that unusual. Rushed, a sign that something is being covered." "Some people would," she agreed. "I'd ask them what a longer engagement would have proven." Damien and I understood each other. Waiting seemed like a waste of time that neither of us had to spare. Carver sat with that. And the circumstances of the wedding. There were stories. She felt Damien beside her go very still. She did not look at him. She looked at Carver. "What kind of stories?" she asked. "That the original arrangement was for another woman, that you were a substitution." Carver's voice was not cruel. It was matter of fact. He was testing the wound to see whether it was clean or infected. That the whole thing was a financial arrangement that barely held together. The room was completely silent. Claire put both hands flat on the table and looked at Thomas Carver with the same expression she had used the night she told Margaret that her father's name was staying on the deed, calm, immovable, completely clear. "The original arrangement was made with my stepsister," she said. "She chose not to honor it. Damien and I had known each other separately privately for months before the arrangement was ever proposed. When she ran, he asked me instead. I said yes." She held his gaze. "What you're asking is whether I'm here against my will, whether this marriage is a performance, whether I'm a liability that can be leveraged. The answer to all 3 is no, but I understand why you asked. It was the right question." Carver looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Damien, then back at her. "The 4th question," he said. "And this one I'm asking you, Mrs. Cross, not your husband." He leaned forward slightly. "If things go wrong, if this life asks something of you that you didn't expect, something that costs you, do you stay or do you go?" The silence was absolute. Claire did not hesitate. "I don't run from hard things, Mr. Carver," she said. "I never have. The people who raised me after my father died did everything in their power to break that out of me. They didn't manage it." She paused for one breath. "Neither will anything else." Thomas Carver sat back in his chair. He looked at his son. Something passed between them, wordless fast, the communication of people who have shared a long history of making judgments together. Then he looked at Damien. "I'll have my people call Victor by end of day," he said. "We'll work out the terms." Damien said, "Good." Just that one word. But she heard what was underneath it. In the elevator down, Daniel Carver stayed on the 14th floor. The 3 of them, Damien, Claire, and the silence between them descended 14 floors without speaking. In the lobby, Reyes was already pulling the car around. They walked through the glass doors and into the sharp morning air, and then Damien reached out and his hand found her arm, briefly a pressure just above her elbow that was there for 2 seconds and then gone. She didn't look at him. She got in the car. They were halfway back to the house before he said, "The question about running. You didn't look at me before you answered." "No," she said. "Why?" "Because the answer wasn't for you," she said. "It was for him, and it needed to be true in a way that had nothing to do with you." She looked out the window. "If I'd looked at you before I answered, it would have looked like I was checking, like I needed permission or reassurance." She turned to him. "I didn't need either." He was quiet for a moment. "It was true, though," he said. "What you said, about not running." "Yes," she said simply. "Even now, knowing what you know." "Rossi, the threat the life you're actually in." She looked at him steadily. "Damien, I lived in a basement for 3 years, and I got up every morning, and I made coffee for people who treated me like furniture. I am not afraid of hard, I am afraid of invisible." She held his gaze. "You see me. Whatever else this is complicated and dangerous, and not what either of us planned you see me, that is not nothing." He didn't speak for a long time after that. When he did, his voice was quieter than she'd heard it. "I've been alone in this for a long time," he said. "I know," she said. "That ends now." The car moved through the city. Reyes drove steadily, eyes forward, professional. And beside Claire, Damien Cross sat with the particular stillness of a man who has just been handed something he had stopped believing he would find and is very carefully, very deliberately choosing to hold it. They were back at the house by 1 o'clock. Victor was waiting on the front steps, which was not his usual position. His face had the tight, controlled quality she now recognized as the specific way he looked when the news was not good and he had been managing it alone while they were unavailable. She was out of the car before Damien. "What happened?" she asked. Victor looked at her, then at Damien, then back at her. He had stopped doing the thing where he looked to Damien first before including her in anything. That had stopped on day 2. "Margaret Holloway made a call this morning," he said. "Not to us, to Rossi's people." The words landed in Claire's chest like a physical impact. She stood very still on the front steps, and she let the full weight of that sentence assemble itself in her mind, making sure she understood correctly, making sure she wasn't jumping to a conclusion that wasn't there. She wasn't jumping. It was exactly what it sounded like. "What kind of call?" Damien asked. His voice had gone to a different register, very quiet. The kind of quiet that is not calm, but is the thing that serious men put over the top of anger. "The content isn't confirmed yet," Victor said, "but the connection is. Her number to a relay we've flagged as Rossi adjacent. 14-minute call. This morning at 9:47 while you were in the meeting. Basti, Dandy, and While Claire had been sitting at that conference table telling Thomas Carver that she didn't run from hard things, her stepmother had been on the phone with Damien's most dangerous enemy. She walked past both men into the house. She went to the kitchen. She stood at the counter and pressed both palms flat against the surface and breathed the same way she had breathed through the phone call with Margaret 2 nights ago, not because she was about to collapse, but because controlled breathing was how she kept the fury from making decisions before her mind did. Elena appeared in the doorway, took one look at her face, and quietly turned around and left. Damien came in 30 seconds later. Victor did not follow. "Say it," Claire said before he could speak. "I don't know yet what she told them." "But she told them something." Claire looked up. "She told them something that Rossi didn't have. Something about me, about the marriage, about our vulnerabilities, because that is the only coin Margaret has ever dealt in, other people's weaknesses." She straightened. "What does she know that could hurt us?" Damien was quiet. "Damien, what does she know?" He came further into the kitchen. He looked at her with the eyes of a man deciding how to say something he had been carrying and hadn't planned to put down yet. "She knows the full terms of the original arrangement," he said. "The financial details, the debt figures, what was promised, what was transferred. If Rossi gets that, he can use it publicly. Make the marriage look purely transactional. Make you look like a purchased solution rather than a real wife," she said. Yes, she absorbed that. Can he use it in a way that damages Carver make? Carver second-guess the agreement he just made? Damien's expression shifted. She could see him thinking through it, fast running the board. Possibly, he said. If Rossi moves in the next 24 hours before Carver's people call Victor, then we need to move first. She pushed off the counter. Call Carver now. Don't wait for end of day. Call him directly, not through channels, and tell him that there may be information coming from Rossi's direction about the circumstances of the marriage, and that you wanted to speak to him directly before he heard it from someone else. She met Damien's eyes. Control the narrative before Rossi does. He stared at her. Damien. That is exactly right, he said. He already had his phone out. She turned away while he made the call. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden, at the afternoon light falling across the ordinary, peaceful exterior of a house that was on every side, surrounded by something that wanted to break it apart. And she thought about Margaret, about what it meant that the woman who had degraded her for 3 years, who had thrown her at a Mafia boss like a piece of salvage, had turned around and handed that same Mafia boss's enemy the tools to destroy what little stability Claire had just begun to build. She was not surprised. She recognized that was the worst part. She was not surprised at all. Margaret had never seen her as a person, had never seen anything about her as something with inherent value. She was always to Margaret a resource to be deployed and a liability to be shed. But she had miscalculated this time. For the first time in 3 years, Margaret had miscalculated, because Claire was no longer alone. Damien's call lasted 11 minutes. She listened without facing him, tracking the tone rather than every word, the specific low authority of his voice, the precision of his sentences, the complete absence of defensiveness. He was not explaining or apologizing. He was offering Carver something clarity before the noise started. He was treating Carver as someone owed the truth rather than managed with a version of it. She had told him to do that. 2 nights ago in the kitchen, talking about Gareth and the Hendricks property. He had listened. When he ended the call, she turned around. Carver held, he said. He said, and I'm giving you the exact words he said, a man who calls me himself before the problem hits is a man I can work with. The agreement stands, she exhaled, one long, controlled breath. Good. Claire. He said her name with a weight to it that made her look at him fully. Margaret, how do you want to handle it? She thought about that. Thought about the basement, thought about the plate of food against the wall, thought about the collar of her shirt, the wine breath, the words, you are nothing, you own nothing, you are nothing, spoken in the dark by a woman who needed her stepdaughter to be small in order to feel large. The document, she said, the one about my father's deed. She was supposed to have it ready by Friday. Yes. I want it moved up. I want it today. I want Damien Cross's legal team calling her within the hour with a very clear message. The document is signed today, notarized today, and delivered today, or the conversation about the original debt arrangement, every financial detail she gave Rossi, and why becomes a legal matter rather than a family one. She kept her voice even. She thought she was handing Rossi a weapon. She handed me one instead. Damien looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, Victor. Victor appeared from the hallway doorway as though he had been precisely positioned there, which he probably had. Get Marcus and the legal team on the phone, Damien said, and find out every detail of that 947 call, every relay, every connection, every word we can reconstruct. He paused. Also draft a letter to Margaret Holloway's address. Mrs. Cross will tell you the contents. Victor looked at Claire. She straightened her spine and told him word by word exactly what to say. Victor wrote without comment, and when she was done, he looked at her with the same expression she had caught on his face that first morning in the kitchen, the one she had filed as respect. He nodded once. He left. The house moved into motion around her calls, messages, the quiet, controlled urgency of people who knew their jobs. Damien went to the study. Reyes positioned outside the front door. Hale on the back. Marcus on the phone with legal. Claire went upstairs, changed out of her meeting clothes, and came back down in 40 minutes to find Elena in the kitchen with coffee waiting and a look on her face that was somewhere between concern and something warmer. You're all right, Elena said. I'm better than all right, Claire said. And she meant it, not because everything was resolved, not because the danger had reduced, not because Margaret's betrayal didn't sting in the specific sour way that betrayal by an unsurprising person still manages to, but because she was standing in the middle of the storm and her legs were holding, because she had looked at Carver across that table and told the truth without flinching, because she had come home and within 30 minutes had turned a crisis into a counter-move. She was still standing. That had always been the whole thing, really, the only metric that had ever actually mattered. The legal team had reached Margaret by 3 o'clock. By 4:15, Victor had a signed, notarized copy of the document protecting Robert Holloway's property holdings under Claire's name delivered by courier. She held the envelope for a moment before she opened it, felt the weight of it, the specific density of a thing that had been a long time coming. Then she opened it, read every word, confirmed it was correct, and set it on the kitchen table. Then she sat down and did something she had not allowed herself to do in 3 years. She put her face in her hands just for 60 seconds, and she let herself feel the full scale of what had just been given back to her. Not the money, not the house, not any material thing. Her father's name, protected, legally, formally, irrevocably hers. She heard the wheels stop in the doorway. She lifted her head, didn't bother composing her face, and looked at Damien Cross. Her eyes were dry. She had not cried, but she looked like a person who had just finished carrying something very heavy for a very long distance and had finally been allowed to set it down. He looked at the envelope on the table, then at her. "Your father would be proud of you," he said. She didn't trust her voice immediately. She waited 1 beat. Then, "He would have liked you," she said. "He respected people who did what they said they would." She looked at him directly. "You said you'd seen me. You said you'd chosen me. You've done both." She picked up the document and slid it into the envelope. "That matters." He nodded slowly. "Tomorrow is Thursday," she said, pulling herself back to the present with the same deliberate force she had been pulling herself back to the present her entire life. "The board meeting." "Yes," he said. "Downtown, 9 o'clock. I'll be ready." "I know you will," he said. She carried the document upstairs and put it in the inside pocket of her bag where it would stay until she had a safe place for it somewhere that was hers, in a life that was very slowly, very cautiously, starting to feel like something she had chosen rather than something that had happened to her. She stood at the window of her room and looked out at the evening settling across the city, and she thought about how 3 days ago she had been in a basement with a broken hot plate and a single blanket. She thought about how much could change in 3 days. She thought about the charity gala that Victor had mentioned was coming at the end of the week, a high-profile event, Damien's world at its most visible, hundreds of people who would be watching them, assessing them, deciding what the marriage of Damien Cross meant for their own positions and alliances. She thought about the fact that Margaret would almost certainly try to be there, and Sabrina, the sister who had run, who had handed Claire this life without knowing she was handing her anything at all. She stood at the window and she felt the shape of what was coming with a clarity that was almost physical. It wasn't done. None of it was done. The hardest part hadn't even started yet. She found out about the gala invitation on Thursday morning, 30 minutes before the board meeting, when Victor handed her a cream envelope with the kind of weight that expensive stationery has, the weight of something that knows it matters and wants you to feel it. The Whitmore Foundation Annual Charity Gala. Saturday evening. Black tie. 240 guests. The kind of event where the money in the room could fund a small country, and the conversations that happened in the corners were worth more than anything said at the podium. "Rossi will be there," Victor said, watching her face. "Of course he will," she said. She handed the envelope back. "We're going." Victor nodded. He had stopped questioning her decisions on day 3. She had noted that and appreciated it without mentioning it. The board meeting downtown was 3 hours of a different kind of performance, not the raw, direct testing of the Carver meeting, but the layered, formal choreography of people who were technically operating within legitimate structures, and needed everyone to keep believing that. Damien chaired it from his position at the head of the table with the same complete authority he brought to every room he entered, and Claire sat beside him and watched 12 people who ran 12 different pieces of a very large, very complex operation take the measure of her without appearing to. She let them. She spoke twice, once to correct a figure that a man named Hollis had cited incorrectly, which she did without apology and without softening, and once to ask a question about the Hendricks property timeline that caused 3 people to look at each other in a way that told her the timeline was already a problem that nobody had officially acknowledged yet. Damien looked at her when she asked it. She kept her eyes on the board. When the meeting ended, Hollis stopped her in the hallway. He was 60-something, 3-piece suit, the specific confidence of a man who had been in every room long enough to believe he owned them. "Mrs. Cross," he said. He said it the way people say a title when they want you to know they don't fully accept it. "I wasn't aware you had a background in finance." "I don't," she said pleasantly. "I have a background in paying attention." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said carefully, "Your predecessor, the original Mrs. Cross, who was anticipated, she had a different profile." "Yes," Claire said. "She did. She also isn't here." She smiled at him just enough. "I am. Have a good day, Mr. Hollis." She walked to the elevator without looking back. In the car, Damien said, "Hollis is going to be a problem." "Hollis is already a problem," she said. "He's been one since before I arrived. He's just recalibrating what kind of problem I'm going to be for him." She looked out the window. "Leave him to me." "That's what I'm afraid of," Damien said, and this time the thing adjacent to a smile made it fully to his face. She looked at him. It was the first time she had seen him actually smile. It changed something in his face, opened it briefly into something that was not the controlled, deliberate architecture of a man who had spent 15 years being careful. Something more human and more dangerous at the same time, because she found it significantly harder to look away from than she was expecting. She turned back to the window and said nothing, and the warmth that moved through her chest was something she decided to examine later when the week was not actively trying to collapse in 14 directions at once. Friday came and went in a series of controlled urgencies. The Rossi situation had shifted. Marcus confirmed that the East Perimeter surveillance had pulled back, which Victor read not as retreat, but as repositioning, which was worse. When you could see the threat, you could measure it. When it moved out of sight, it was making a different kind of move. "The gala," Damien said Friday evening. "He'll use the crowd." They were in the study. She had taken to sitting in the chair across from his desk in the evenings, not because she had been invited to exactly, but because she had simply done it, and he had not objected, and over 4 days it had become a thing they both understood without discussing. She worked from her phone or the household files while he worked from his desk, and the silence between them was the productive kind, 2 people in the same room, both useful, neither performing. "He won't move physically," she said. "Not at a public event with 200 witnesses. He'll use the crowd socially. He'll have people there who will work the room, plant questions, create doubt. He wants Carver to hear something tonight that makes him hesitate by morning." She set her phone down. "And he'll try to get to me directly." Damien looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he knows that you're the wall," she said. "He's been trying to get through you for 18 months and you're still standing, so he'll try the other way in." She held his gaze. "Me. He'll find a way to approach me alone if possible, and he'll say something designed to either frighten me or make me doubt this." She gestured between them. "Whatever this is. Then we don't give him a moment alone with you." "That's not the answer," she said. "If I'm never alone, I look like something that needs protecting. That's exactly the image he wants the replacement bride who married into danger and doesn't know what she's doing." She shook her head. "Let him come to me. I'll be ready." Damien was very still. "Claire, I have been handling people who wanted to make me feel small my entire life," she said with a quiet force that cut through whatever he was about to say. "Marco Rossi is bigger and more dangerous than Margaret Holloway. He is not fundamentally different." The silence after that was long. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Just that, not a negotiation, not a counter-argument. "What do you need?" She looked at him. "I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing. And I need you the moment I look at you across that room on Saturday night, just look, that's all to come to me. Not run, walk, calmly. Like a man who is completely certain of where his wife is at all times, because he wants to be, not because he has to be." He held her gaze. "Done," he said. Saturday arrived with the specific weight of things that have been building all week. Elena helped her with the dress, deep midnight blue, structured at the shoulders, simple in the way that the most expensive things are simple because they have nothing to hide. Claire stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself. Really looked, and she tried to locate in her reflection the woman who had stood in a basement kitchen 5 days ago and been told she was nothing and was going to marry a stranger. She found her. She was still there. The basement woman, the invisible woman, the woman who got up at 5 and made coffee for people who didn't thank her for it. She was still there in Claire's spine, in her eyes, in the set of her mouth. She hadn't gone anywhere. She had just gotten a great deal more dangerous. They arrived at the Whitmore event at 8:15. The room was everything it was designed to be, money and power and social performance at its highest register, every person in it acutely aware of every other person, alliances visible in who stood with whom, and schisms visible in the careful distances between certain pairs of people. Claire had been to events like this exactly twice in her life, both times as the daughter Robert Holloway was quietly proud of before he died, and everything changed. She knew the grammar of these rooms. She had just never attended one as the subject rather than the observer. Tonight, she was the subject. She felt it the moment they entered the shift in the room's attention, subtle but real, the way a crowd's awareness recalibrates around a new variable. Damien moved through it with the ease of a man who had never once in his life questioned whether he belonged. She stayed beside him and let the room look, and she did not perform comfort. She didn't feel, but she did not reveal discomfort either. She found the middle register present, real watchful, and she held it. They were 20 minutes in when she saw Sabrina. She had not expected that. She had told herself since Thursday that Sabrina might be here, that Margaret might use the gala as a way to create a public moment, that the timing was not accidental. She had prepared for it intellectually. She had not prepared apparently for the actual physical reality of seeing her stepsister standing 40 feet away in a gold dress, looking simultaneously defiant and terrified, which was an expression Claire recognized because she had worn it herself for 3 years. Sabrina saw her at exactly the same moment. Neither of them moved. It was Sabrina who looked away first. Margaret was beside her, of course she was. Black dress immaculate as always, the silver-streaked hair perfect. She was speaking to a man Claire didn't recognize, and as Claire watched, Margaret's eyes moved across the room with the practiced sweep of a woman cataloging her position and landed on Claire. The expression that moved across Margaret's face was the most honest thing Claire had ever seen from her. It was not anger, not contempt, not the cold management of a woman who believed she was in control. It was something simpler and rawer than any of that. It was fear. 12 o'clock. Claire said quietly, without turning her head. Damien, beside her, redirected his gaze. "I see them," he said. "Margaret is with someone I don't recognize. Gray suit, silver tie, standing in her left." A pause. "That," Damien said with a precision that told her he recognized the man immediately, "is Rossi's attorney." Everything tightened. "She brought Rossi's attorney to the gala," Claire said. Her voice stayed perfectly flat. She was going to use this event. Whatever she told Rossi on the phone Friday, she was going to deliver something else here in person through the attorney. A document, an affidavit, something about the marriage that she thought would— She stopped, breathed once. She was going to try to have this marriage invalidated. Damien looked at her. "Can she—" "Not anymore," Claire said. "The document she signed Friday, the one protecting my father's deed, she signed it as an acknowledgement of the marriage's legitimacy. I made sure of that specific language." She turned to look at him directly. "Your legal team drafted it. Check with Marcus, but I believe she just handed us the thing that makes her plan completely void." He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he took out his phone and sent a message, without looking away from her face. His phone buzzed back in less than a minute. He read it. "You're right," he said. "She signed away the challenge when she signed the deed acknowledgement. Her attorney knows it too, watch." She turned. Across the room, Margaret was leaning toward the gray-suited man with an urgency that was just barely contained, and the attorney was speaking to her with the specific, controlled expression of someone delivering news that is not going to improve with repetition. Margaret's face went through 3 expressions in 5 seconds. Claire watched them all. Then Margaret looked across the room at her. And for the first time in 3 years, Claire did not look away first. She held Margaret's gaze across that room full of 200 people in her midnight blue dress, beside the man whose name she now wore, and she did not blink, and she did not soften, and she did not make herself 1 centimeter smaller. She held it until Margaret was the one who turned away. It should have felt like more than it did, like triumph maybe, or release. But what it actually felt like was simpler, like setting down a weight she had carried so long. She had stopped noticing it was there until suddenly her hands were empty. Rossi found her at 9:15. She had separated from Damien by 4 feet, not enough to be isolated enough to be approachable, and she was speaking to a woman named Patricia, who ran one of the foundation's committees, when she felt the room shift in the specific way that a room shifts around someone whose gravity is significant. She kept her eyes on Patricia and finished the sentence she was in the middle of, and then she turned. He was exactly what she had expected, and nothing like what she had imagined. Mid-60s compact, build the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something more useful than handsome. He looked like a man who had decided a long time ago that being underestimated was a tool he would use rather than a condition he would correct. She understood that perfectly. "Mrs. Cross," he said. His voice was smooth, warm, the voice of someone who had spent decades making dangerous things sound like courtesy. "I don't believe we've met. Marco Rossi." "I know who you are," she said. He smiled. "Of course you do." He stepped slightly to the side, angling the conversation away from Patricia, who took the cue and excused herself. Rossi looked at Claire with the specific measuring attention that she had now received from enough powerful men this week to recognize it clearly. "I wanted to offer my congratulations on the marriage. It was rather sudden." "Thank you," she said. "We didn't see a reason to wait." "No, I suppose not." He paused. "Just a beat, deliberate, timed. Though I understand the original arrangement was with your sister." "Stepsister," Claire said. "And yes, she chose differently." "Leaving you to step in." He said it with a warmth that was entirely manufactured. "That must have been an enormous adjustment." "Not particularly," she said. "I've always been good at stepping into situations that other people left in disorder and making them work." Something moved behind his eyes. He recalibrated. She watched him do it, the small, imperceptible shift of a man who has been expecting a particular kind of conversation and is finding something different from what he prepared for. "You're not what I expected," he said. And unlike when people had said similar things to her this week with warmth or evaluation, this was said with the specific flatness of a man conceding a point he hadn't planned to concede. "I know," she said. "I've been hearing that a lot recently." "Damien is a complicated man," he said, pivoting, trying a different angle. "His world is not forgiving, especially for people who come into it without preparation, without history." "Are you warning me?" she asked. "Or threatening me?" He smiled again. "Merely observing." "Then I'll make an observation in return," she said. She kept her voice at the exact same conversational register, pleasant, direct, nothing sharp in the surface of it all, the sharpness underneath. "You spent 8 months believing that a wheelchair made Damien Cross manageable. You spent 4 days believing that a replacement bride made this marriage fragile. You put men on the East Perimeter for 3 nights. You had Margaret Holloway on the phone for 14 minutes Friday morning and an attorney in this room tonight." She looked at him steadily. "None of it worked. The Carver Agreement holds. The marriage is legally airtight. And every move you've made this week has been noted, documented, and handed to people who make decisions based on documentation." She paused. "I'd suggest the next move you make be a very careful one, Mr. Rossi. I would hate for you to run out of room." The silence between them was 4 seconds long. She counted them. Then Damien was beside her. He had crossed the room in the time it takes to take 6 unhurried steps, and he stood at her shoulder, not in front of her, not between her and Rossi, but beside her, which said everything that needed to be said about how he saw her. Rossi looked at them both. "Marco," Damien said. "Just his name, the way you say a name when the meeting is over." Rossi looked at Claire one more time. She held his gaze without expression. He nodded, barely the minimal acknowledgement of a man who has completed an assessment and is recalculating his position. Then he turned and moved back into the crowd. She felt Damien's hand at the small of her back. 2 seconds, then gone. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Completely," she said. And she meant it. It was Sabrina who found her at 9:40, which she had not predicted, but should have. Sabrina had always been braver in the second act than the first, afraid to show up bolder once she was already there. She appeared at Claire's elbow near the edge of the room, and up close she looked less defiant and more hollowed out, the way people look when they have been running from something long enough that the running has cost them more than whatever they ran from. "Claire!" she said. Claire turned. She looked at her stepsister, at the girl who had dropped clothes on the floor, and said, "Pick those up for 3 years who had never once used her name, who had run from a wedding and handed her life to someone else without a backward glance." And she waited. "I didn't know," Sabrina said. Her voice was low, unsteady. About what Damien was actually like. Mom told me she made it sound like..." She stopped, swallowed. "I thought I was running from something terrible." "You were running," Claire said. "From something. I'm not entirely sure the specific reason matters as much as the running." Sabrina looked at her. Her eyes were bright in the way that means the person is working very hard not to cry in public. Is it? "I'm fine, Sabrina." She said it clearly, without cruelty, without warmth, without anything performed. Just the fact of it. "I am genuinely actually fine. Better than fine." Sabrina absorbed that. She looked like she was going to say several more things, and then looked like she decided against all of them, which was the most self-aware thing Claire had ever seen her do. "Okay," she said quietly. "Good. Go home," Claire said, "and get your mother out of here before she makes another decision she can't undo." Sabrina nodded. She turned and walked back through the crowd, and Claire watched her go and felt nothing she hadn't already made her peace with. No anger left, no grief. Just the clean, empty feeling of a chapter that is completely finished. She found Damien in conversation with Thomas Carver on the far side of the room at 10 o'clock. The son was there too, Daniel, who had tried to separate them at the meeting, who was now speaking to Damien with none of the angled wariness of that first encounter. Carver himself had the look of a man who has made a decision and stopped second-guessing it. He extended his hand to Claire when she approached. "Mrs. Cross," he said, with a warmth that was different from Tuesday's assessment. This was the warmth of someone who has already decided where you stand. "Your husband tells me you had a productive week." "We did," she said. "I think next week will be even better." Carver smiled, a real one, the kind that changes a whole face. "I believe you're right," he said. They left at 10:45. In the car, she sat beside Damien, and the city moved past them, and neither of them spoke for a long time, and the silence had that specific quality she had come to recognize over 5 days, not absence of words, but fullness. The kind of quiet that only exists between people who have covered enough ground together that they no longer need to fill it. "You told Rossi about the documentation," he said eventually. "Yes." "He didn't know we had that level of detail." "I know," she said. "Now he does, which means he has to recalculate his entire position before he makes his next move, and every day he spends recalculating is a day we use." She turned to look at him. "Victor said Carver's people finalized the terms this afternoon." "Signed and delivered," Damien said. "Rossi's northeastern option is gone. He has no ground presence, no ally in the region, and every move this week documented in a way that limits what he can do openly." He paused. "You did that, this week. You walked in with nothing, and you did that." "We did it," she said. "There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. The city lights moved across his face. When he spoke again, his voice had that quality it sometimes had in the evenings in the study, the unguarded quality, the one that wasn't for anyone else. "When I started watching you 7 months ago," he said, "I told myself it was strategic, that I needed someone specific with specific qualities, and I had found the right person." He looked at her. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. She held his gaze. "The photograph at your father's grave," he said. "You went on a Tuesday, not the anniversary, not any particular date, just a Tuesday because you'd had a week that was harder than usual and you needed to be near him." He stopped. "I had a man pull back when he saw you coming. He called me and he said she's not doing anything should I stay, and I said no, give her the hour. Just make sure she's safe and give her the hour." She didn't speak, She didn't trust her voice. "I don't know how to do this," he said. The admission cost him something. She could hear it, the specific weight of words from a man who had spent 15 years making sure he never needed to say them. The rest of it, the operations, the strategy, the managing of threats, "I know how to do that. This is not that." "No," she said, "it isn't. Are you going to tell me I need to learn?" A slight edge of something that might have been vulnerability, quickly managed. "No," she said. "I'm going to tell you that neither do I, and that neither of us knowing how to do this is probably the most honest foundation we could have started with." She looked at him steadily. "We figure it out. Together. The same way we figured out every other thing this week." The car stopped in front of the house. Reyes cut the engine. Neither of them moved immediately. "I chose correctly," Damien said. Not to her, not exactly, more like a statement made to the record, a man confirming something to himself that he had long suspected but needed to say aloud to make real. "Yes," she said. "You did." She opened the door. She walked up the front steps. Victor held the door, and she walked through it into a house that was hers, not by birth, not by luck, not by any of the forces that had arranged themselves around her life with the goal of keeping her small and invisible and permanently in someone else's basement. By choice, by fight, by the specific, unbreakable stubbornness of a woman who had been told she was nothing so many times that she had developed an immunity to it. The ring on her finger was warm now. She noticed that on the stairs, the same way she had noticed the cold of it 5 days ago in the car from the estate, the same ring, the same metal, the same finger. But it had taken on heat from her skin over the course of 5 days, and it fit now in the way that new things fit when you stop being a stranger to them. She was not invisible anymore. She was not a basement woman, not a replacement bride, not a pawn in someone else's arrangement, not the girl who poured the coffee and wasn't thanked for it. She was not what Margaret had tried to make her, not what Sabrina had assumed. She was not what Rossi had been certain she would be. She was Claire Cross. She had walked into the hardest week of her life with nothing but herself, and she had not once, not for a single moment, let anyone in that week define the terms of who she was. And that, not the legal victory, not the Carver agreement, not Rossi's recalculation, not even the document with her father's name safely protected inside it, that was the thing she had won. That was the thing no one could ever take back.